church membership was moving up towards where the community was moving. So that as the community grew up in this area of town, the church moved its building up. At the time that it built in the Pine Hill Cemetery, there was a controversy of whether they were supposed to move there or not, because at that time we were still part of the town. The town and the church were one and the same. But some people decided to build the church at the cemetery lot, and the town decided that they had to hold services in both on Dover Neck and in the church in the cemetery. Every other week they would go to the other place, because there's a group of the members who petitioned to stay down in that area of town, and another group wanted to move up to this area of town. So for a while they were holding services in both churches. The community had all of its meetings in the church meeting house. And one of the reasons we're called the first parish church is because the parish was the community organization, the church was a religious organization. And members of the community, there were two types of membership. There was the parish members, who were the community leaders, and the church members, who were part of the religious organization. And they also established the board of deacons and the board of wardens. The wardens took care of the building and the community part, and the deacons took care of the religious part. But it was one and the same, the church and the organization of the community. And the church, before Dover became a town, First Parish Church was in existence. So the early existence of Dover was First Parish Church. In the beginning, we had the clock, and then the clock stopped working at one time. And the church actually tried to fix it or to get a new one, but they couldn't afford it, so they decided not to do it. And some community members went around and did some fundraising, and they actually bought a new clock and gave it to us. For a while, the town took care of it, and they paid people to wind it and take care of it, but then now it's the church's responsibility. In 1878, this church had a big renovation, and at that time, the feeling was that the way that you worshiped God and showed how you cared for God was to have something grand. And so they went out and redid this whole sanctuary on a grand scale, and they hired someone to come in and paint it. And the painting is called fresco painting, and it's like what they do in Pompeii, Italy, the fresco painting on all the walls. And our ceiling right now is what's left of the painting that was done back then. And at that time, all the walls were painted and the ceiling. And he even painted the organ pipes. But About 2 months ago, there was a program on New Hampshire Chronicle that was telling about some fresco paintings that were done at the Masonic Temple in Effingham. But they didn't know who did the paintings. They only knew the last name was Butler. And so I thought, oh, I bet it's the same person. And so I went up to Effingham to talk to the people up there at the Masonic Temple. And he told me all about the person who had come to paint it. All they knew was his name was A. Butler and that he was from Lawrence, Massachusetts. Well, I put 2 and 2 together because the person who painted our medallion was Philip A. Butler, and he apprenticed himself to a painter in Lawrence, Massachusetts. So now we finally found out who the painter was and where he was from, and we found a picture of him actually in the book of the history of Candia, New Hampshire, because that's where he was born, and he was a member of the Congregational Church in Candia, New Hampshire. The Dover Children's Home. That started from the Women's Temperance Union, who were members. Most of the beginning people were members of our church, men and women were beginnings of the Women's Temperance Union. And they had their first meetings at our church. And then they were the beginning of the Dover Children's Home, because one of their goals was to help the needy and less fortunate in the community. So they started the Dover Children's Home. And then members of our community, of our church, donated to the Children's Home every single year. So for over 100 years, and also actually right to this day, we still support the Dover Children's Home. And even though it was started by the Women's Temperance Union, that was actually part of our church. There's a lot of things like that in the community, like the first daycare center was started by members of our church, and the food pantry, and things like that.